Hello, everyone, and welcome to the TDWI webinar program. I'm Andrew Miller, and I'll be your moderator. For today's program, we're going to talk about optimizing business intelligence, eliminate hidden waste, and maximize ROI in your BI environment. And our sponsor today is Metric Insights. For our presentations today, we'll hear first from David Stodder with TDWI. And after Dave speaks, we'll be joined by Marius Moscovici with Metric Insights for a presentation and a fireside chat. Before I turn over the time to our speakers, please allow me to go over a few basics. Today's webinar will be about an hour long, and at the end of their presentations, our speakers will host a question and answer period. So if at any time during these presentations you'd like to submit a question, just use the Ask a Question area on your screen to type in your question. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can click on the Technical FAQs area and you'll receive technical assistance. If you'd like a copy of today's presentation, you can locate the resource window to download the PDF. And lastly, we are recording today's event and we'll be emailing you a link to an archived version so you can view the presentation again later if you choose, or if you'd like to share with a colleague. Again, today we're going to be discussing optimizing business intelligence, and our first speaker is David Stodder. He's a research fellow with TDWI. As an analyst, writer, and researcher, Dave has provided thought leadership on key topics in BI, analytics, IT, and information management for over 2 decades. Previously, he headed up his own independent firm and served as vice president and research director with Ventana Research. He was the founding chief editor of Intelligent Enterprise and served as editorial director there for 9 years. And with TDWI Research, Dave focuses on providing research-based insight and best practices for organizations implementing BI, analytics, performance management, and related technologies and methods. With that, please welcome Dave, and I will hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome to everyone here. I'm glad to have you joining us. I think we've got a core topic for TDWI audience, and a very important one as to how to basically get more ROI, reduce the TCO in BI environments. So as Andrew mentioned, what I'm going to talk about myself is I'll talk about some BI trends, some of the modernization drivers we see at TDWI, the challenges facing organizations, and solution trends. And then we'll hear from Marius, the Metric Insights presentation, and then Marius and I will be talking about a lot of these issues in the fireside chat. So certainly be thinking about questions you want to ask us and in the audience Q&A portion, as we'll get to that after our fireside chat. So BI, it's often kind of ignored these days in the age of AI. I think AI gets all the attention, but business intelligence is certainly still the heart, as I have here, the expansion and data-driven decision-making is really the whole engine of collecting the data, blending the data, enabling users to blend data on their own in a self-service fashion, visualizing the data, interacting with the data, doing more advanced analytics beyond reporting. And so it needs to be really a focus of investing. And so what do we see in the research? Organizations are trying to reduce data and decision latency. All of the bottlenecks and snafus that come up, they get in the way of operational decisions. That's often been, at the very top, is to try to spread BI out in the organization so that all operations in the organization, that managers, that even frontline users have the information that they need to make good decisions, to take actions that will help in terms of the business performance, in terms of customer interactions and partner interactions. So performance management is number 2, 45% saying that this is the top focus for them to invest. There, of course, as we're talking about metrics, KPIs, and things like that, that help the organization communicate about goals and objectives and keep everybody working in the same direction. This is not an easy thing to do in organizations. It's easy to put a dashboard in front of people or a scorecard, but how to get the information together, that's really what BI provides. Financial management, certainly organizations are trying to smooth out and improve, particularly as they diversify and even have subsidiaries across the globe. To pull all that information together is no small task, so that corporate officials and also just managers can get a better sense of how the organization is doing to do proper forecasting and budgeting. Customer engagement and personalization. Organizations are having more direct relationships with customers, more types of organizations, I should say, really. And so collecting that data that they have, and then also working with partners to have good data to put it together for better customer engagement and personalization is essential. And BI is right in the middle of that, to collect all the data, blend the data, and that allow visualization and better interaction. So as I mentioned, self-service, seeking to make it easier for users to to have the information, to get to the information they need, to agility, so that as they change their focus and change their goals, they can respond to that. More intuitive, so it's sort of sunk in with what the users are trying to do, and more contextual into the business problems that they're trying to solve. Transformative democratization, so is really kind of the bottom line here. Data access and actionable information for a wide range of users. And so organizations are trying to overcome the barriers and also reduce costs or manage costs, which is what a lot of what we'll be talking about today. So I've got a research chart I want to show here. This is really about data and AI, or data science and AI, arriving in the BI environments. And so what the question we asked here was, how important to your organization is it to your organization to increase AI-driven automation and augmentation in each of the following areas? And so we can see here that security is at the top of the list, which is sort of interesting, but also not surprising, really, because that's a key concern as data is flowing through the organization, is to be able to use AI-driven intelligent automation to handle those issues. But really thinking about BI, data quality is right at the top. Data quality is a huge issue. And so we see here 40% say it's a very important current priority, 27% calling it important, but not their most important priority right at the moment. BI querying, dashboards, and performance management. So organizations, and particularly users, so we certainly see that users want to see more AI in those kinds of processes, so that it's not just the sort of the standard and often canned kind of reporting and querying capabilities, but actually be able to have AI so to improve data interaction. And of course, all this is really having to happen in the self-service sense. So self-service natural language querying is certainly a major target to create this conversational interaction with chatbots, co-pilots. We certainly see a lot of the BI tools today introducing things like that, chatbots, co-pilots, natural language querying. So 56% saying that self-service is a driver. Using large, and I should say also small, language models, so determining the type of data that will be used for the LLMs and generative AI in BI environments is definitely a focus in organizations, and to be efficient in that and make it not take so much time so that the results will be applicable and prescient. So data science and AI to support actionable insights, guide user experiences, so there's recommendations, capabilities, offer recommendations, AI-driven automation, throughout these processes that we see here in our chart. So I think the bottom line is that AI is here, it's coming, there's going to be more of it, and as we think of self-service and the diversity of tools that organizations have, all of these will have AI and be drawing on more data. So it really increases the pressure to be efficient in the BI environment. The Wild West. So this has been issues, of course, in organizations for a long time in BI, particularly as more and more tools are introduced. Each department, each user group, each project might have its own tool. Certainly commercial off-the-shelf tools, open source tools. But again, we see, as we saw on the last chart, data quality problems are really hindering things. And in different research, we have 50% saying this is the biggest issue hindering users from getting timely insights. Generative AI hallucinations will add to the problem, and just sort of not having good data for the AI models to be using can be a huge issue. And so just looking again at our chart here, we're looking kind of drill down on the data pipelines, data connectivity, and ETL, ELT processes. And we can see which are the most challenging, and governing and securing data as it's moving and copied is a huge challenge. Identifying and eliminating workloads that are no longer necessary. So I think Marius and I will be talking about this today, is that it's a big issue in organizations, is that these things sort of spin up, they become kind of legacy systems and just keep going and use a lot of resources, and it's difficult to shut them down and know what the dependencies are. And so we see also on our list here that understanding dependencies between systems, understanding dependencies within jobs are huge issues. Again, it just sort of relates back to that lack of visibility. Reducing time required to load high volumes of data into target platforms. So the whole process of pulling the data in, getting into the data warehouse, data lakehouse today is still difficult and full of bottlenecks. And then just improving performance and scalability, 22% saying that's very challenging, 42% saying it's somewhat challenging. So this is also top issues. So you can sort of look at this chart and compare it to your organization as to what your data platforms are able to generate and what kind of problems are coming up as you try to use ATL, ELT processes to get the data in proper fashion for BI and for analytics. So cost and governance pressures, we see rising risk and TCO, but not enough ROI coming back. So organizations are struggling with escalating costs. Many organizations have tried cloud migration. In fact, they have migrated to the cloud. We see in our research that it's still a top goal today, but it certainly has been in the last X number of years. But finding that really the cloud migration is not the panacea, that there are still costs that are out of control. It's hard to have visibility into the costs in the BI environment as it becomes increasingly diverse. That now, of course, AI and data science processes are making things even more complicated to see where the costs are being generated. And so TCO is rising in organizations. Data governance and security concerns, 33%, saying that these are a hindrance to the realizing value for BI and data management. And so there again, also governance and attending to governance can increase costs, increase delays. And so there needs to be more kind of intelligent automation abilities there to manage that process. So again, I think we'll be talking about all these issues and we get into our discussion portion. Monitoring and observability is absolutely critical to reducing costs, to managing costs, and basically to optimizing the BI environment and maximizing return on investment. So monitoring is essential to really to understand the workloads, to monitor and optimize and orchestrate the workloads, particularly ETLs. We saw on the chart a couple slides ago some of the issues that could be improved by more intelligent monitoring, more complete monitoring, kind of end-to-end monitoring, to gain more control over BI usage, data pipeline growth as users are using self-service tools to develop data pipelines to draw in data on their own. These things can, of course, become really spaghetti. We're back to the spaghetti problem in organizations. Is just these things are crisscrossing, not understanding what the dependencies are, where their performance issues really are lying. So yeah, resource conflicts, redundancy, and then of course there's the surprises. There's a lot of surprises as to what costs are and not being able to trace back what they are. So we do see an important trend towards end-to-end observability, trying to understand the entire data pipeline, the entire journey of the data, the BI journey. What are users doing with it? What is it? How does it really contributing to the decision-making processes within departments, at the corporate level, and throughout, to really see how these things how the processes really fit together and whether it's efficient and effective. But here we see only 8% are currently very satisfied with their end-to-end observability trends. So I think we're still in kind of early days of this capability and sort of encountering siloed views, only being able to monitor individual systems. Again, data and quality and governance really at the top of the list to be able to spot where the problems are, where there are bottlenecks, where there are things that are hindering users in the organization from moving forward with what they're trying to solve. Data lineage, other information to track and solve them is often missing. So for users, how can they find their way, or can they find their way through the maze to realize value with BI? Delays in complexity, at arriving at the right time, right data at the right time to make the decision, the right data and content. There's frustration we see in our research, analyzing metrics at a deeper level, so against those performance metrics that are not complete, they're not working off the most current or the highest quality data. Not tapping the full value of tool features. Certainly see this in organizations where they're deploying lots of different tools, but users really aren't getting the full value out of the tools. They're not using all the feature set because they don't understand them. They can't get the data to work with them. And then it's also the issues of lack of training, particularly in data literacy, to be able to understand what they're seeing, be able to communicate about the data, just sort of those key issues. Personalization capabilities are often lacking as we get sort of managed reporting, canned reporting in applications. Democratization needs, as you spread out in the organization, is obviously going to be diverse users, diverse types of workloads, diverse needs. And so the variety of users needs to be addressed through being able to personalize that BI journey. Not enough automation. 31% are saying that they want to see more automated discovery of actionable insights. And this, of course, the key role for AI to be playing in this. Data science teams and AI teams not collaborating effectively in BI teams for business ROI. So certainly seeing that in our data science and AI research as well as BI is that, again, sort of siloed around the organization, not communicating well, not contributing to what the BI users basically need to make daily decisions, particularly in the operations. All right. Okay, so we're going to, let me just go back here for a second. So what we're going to do is try to look at, I think, a poll question. Oh, let's see. Yeah, okay, here we go. So the poll question is really to maximize ROI, reduce waste, and optimize your BI environment. Which of the following issues is currently your highest priority? And so, Andrew, I'm going to get to the chart here that shows the, okay, I guess we got research. Let's see. You may have to read off the poll question, Andrew. I'm not really seeing, or we could just sort of skip it for now.
I can read it out for you, Dave.
Okay, if you could.
Yeah, not a problem here. So the question is to maximize ROI, reduce waste, and optimize your BI environment. Which of the following issues is currently your highest priority challenge to solve? Is it A, escalating costs and rising total cost of ownership? B, inefficient BI operations, including too much redundancy in reporting systems? C, inability to monitor and detect problems such as surges in database consumption? D, users are not satisfied with BI performance and timeliness of data insights? E, inadequate collaboration and integration between AI, data science, and BI teams? Or F, all of the above are equally high priorities. Please select one, and you may need to scroll down to see all of the answers.
Yeah, there's a lot of possibilities here. So, and I wouldn't be surprised if all of the above is answered by a number of people here. So the answers are coming in, so we want to make sure we get as many as we can. And, just sort of spelling out some of the issues that we talked about and that we'll talk about further in our discussion portion. And the answers are rolling in, so I don't want to cut it off too soon. And okay, let's take a quick look and see what the answers are. We just got a bunch coming in. Thank you, everyone, for your responses. Okay, let's check it out. Okay, it looks like the top answer is really just inefficient BI operations, including too much redundancy in reporting systems. So we'll be talking about today. I know Marius is going to talk about it in his presentation. We'll be hitting that in our discussion portion as well. But got a pretty good rip. Yeah, as I figured, 42%. So the high majority is really all of the above. So all the issues here around we see inability to monitor and detect problems. Users are not satisfied with BI performance and timely insights. And smaller portions talking about the escalating costs and control. Although let me refresh it one more time just to see. Yeah, so answers are still coming in. So it's interesting to see. So everybody is pretty much saying all of the problems with maybe specific attention to the monitoring and users not satisfied with performance. So priorities, as we see, really for improving the user experiences and business ROI, make it easier for you to find data and data products, such as reports, visualizations, dashboards, really AI models as well, to be able to make it easier to find these things. And so this is really looking at the role of a catalog, basically, a capability, often a layer, to be able to find things, to find good data, quality data, to be able to work with metadata, to find the data products, to find things like ETL routines that are working in the organization so that they're not duplicated or conflicting. But also enable customization of the BI experiences, so that personalization. Maximize use of shared resources, such as the catalogs, to be able to find these things. We see here 51% are actually prioritizing this as their steps to improve data and are prioritizing steps to improve data intelligence, such as data catalogs, semantic layers in BI, and more. Enhance data stewardship, so have mentorship stewards who are often assigned in business units or could be in development groups. Someone who really knows the data governance processes, can understand data lineage, where the data came from, what's happening with the data, and can add immeasurably to data literacy in the organization to improve the trust in the data quality and governance, and to, as I've mentioned, mentor users to increase data proficiency. Okay, so to conclude my presentation, BI is certainly still essential. We're seeing the influx of AI, so that's a good thing, but it can also make it more complicated, particularly as there are diverse tools in the organization. So challenges are mounting as organizations democratize, deal with higher volumes and variety of data, and have more complex workloads. It's critical to put in place modernize resource management and monitoring to reduce TCO, total cost of operation, and raise the ROI. Users need help, and so this can come through technology, to improving processes, to improving stewardship, to improving data literacy, to get through the BI maze, to avoid governance risks, and to realize higher ROI. And then organizations need this visibility so that they can manage cost drivers and reduce waste. Okay, well, thank you for your answers in the polls. We'll make note of that as we go into our discussion portion later. But Andrew, let me hand it back to you.
Terrific. Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Marius Moscovici with Metric Insights. Marius has over 20 years of experience in analytics and data warehousing with roles at Oracle, Integral Results, and Linden Lab. He was co-founder and CEO of Integral Results, a leading BI consultancy that was acquired by Idea Integration. He also formed and led the analytics group at Linden Lab. With that, please welcome Marius, and I will hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sort of the applied aspect of some of the things that David mentioned. In other words, how do you really take these findings, the criticality of being able to get improve ROI, increase efficiency. How do you really apply it into your BI ecosystem? And I'm going to sort of posit at the beginning here, that irrespective of what technology you use, whether you use Metric Insights to try to accomplish this, whether you use some competitive product of ours, whether you build something completely from scratch internally, there are really four primary pillars that any kind of a governed BI infrastructure needs to have from an optimization perspective, right, in order to really achieve end-to-end optimization, right? And so let's kind of go over those four key pillars at the beginning, and then we can talk about each of them in more detail, and I'll use sort of Metric Insights as illustrative examples for how we think about some of these things. So the very first thing that I think you've got to have is you've got to have kind of a way, you've got to make a process and some tooling to be able to optimize your environment, to clean up costly, obsolete, and duplicative content. I think that the number one answer on the poll, as far as people's concerns, was actually having duplicative, obsolete, redundant content out there. And I think that's a huge problem in enterprises because analysts come and go. It's much easier for people to build things and to add things than it ever is to remove it. And it's one of those situations where I like to think of it as a huge area where there really is no janitor, right? Like, think about in your organization, there's no BI janitor, right? There's nobody responsible for going in there and cleaning up everything, and nor can there be in a large enterprise. So you have to have mechanisms and tooling that allow you to effectively distribute the ongoing cleanup of BI assets in such a way that you are maintaining a very clean environment without overlapping duplicative content and obsolete content. And that impacts both cost reduction, and it also creates a much better experience for your users, right? Then you need to have a process. Once you've kind of, let's say you've got a pretty clean environment, then you've got to figure out, well, out of the things that are there, how do you govern and certify that content? Not everything in your BI environment is necessarily things you want to broadly consumable by users. Maybe there's some things that people implemented as self-service that they're still using for themselves, but doesn't really isn't relevant for everyone else in the organization or for people in larger teams. But then there's lots of content out there that should be shared broadly, and that content needs to tie together, right? You want to make sure that you're using similar definitions, obviously, for data, so that you don't count sales 7 different ways without explaining those distinctions, right? Classic issue that comes up when people show up in a meeting with totally different numbers for the same thing. You want to make sure to avoid that. And that requires a governance layer where you're taking your content and you're carefully considering, does it work with all the, does this report hang together and kind of work properly with the other reports that are there? Does it show the same information? Is it consistent, coherent? And then how does it certified? How is it continue to remain certified over time? What metadata does it have to have? So having a process for that is obviously very important, because without that, how can you possibly have a governed environment for consumption of BI assets, right? Once you've done that, then the next step, the next pillar, is you need to have some kind of a BI portal or catalog or hub, however you want to think of this, whatever word you want to use here. But you need to have a mechanism by which a regular business user has a destination that is the governed place where they consume analytics. So they're not going into Power BI or into Tableau directly or into MicroStrategy and kind of hunting around and running into things that maybe are not specifically relevant for them, or some maybe are somewhat obsolete, etc. No, they're looking at the things that have gone through this process at the top and have been deemed certified, have the proper amount of metadata wrapped around it for data literacy, and they're consuming in a way they can search across everything that's out there. They can discover content and request access to it if they don't already have access to it. So, having a governed consumption platform that is independent of tool across all the assets that you have that's relevant to folks is absolutely critical, because without that, it is a Wild West that Dave described, right? Where it's chaos rather than order when it comes to the consumption layer. And then the final piece of the puzzle really is you want to deploy a similar kind of governed layer for your analysts, for the folks that are building content within the enterprise, the data scientists, the report developers, the analysts of all manner, whether they're in the business or in IT. They too need a governed environment for creating content, because in a well-optimized BI stack, you don't have analysts going and building things from scratch if something similar already exists. Right? You want them to leverage the thing that already exists. Maybe that already answers their question. Maybe it's a good starting point for their question. They can build on it, right? But they can only do that if they can uncover the right content to use, the right starting place to use. And that's not a trivial thing, because oftentimes they don't necessarily know which tables to use. Maybe they're new to that function, or maybe they're not aware of the fact that another analyst has built a similar a solution in another team, and they just don't have access to it because they haven't been explicitly granted access. So there has to be a analytics marketplace available as a governed space where I can discover, what are all of my data products, what are the components that are there, and how do I, as an analyst, make sure that I'm picking the right starting point to answer the question. Maybe there's already an answer. If not, what should I use as my starting point? So these are the four pillars, the four pieces, and I'm going to go through them in order, and kind of we can discuss kind of what does each of these mean, in reality, like give examples as they relate to a metric insight specifically in this case, right? So for us, from a BI optimization perspective, we think of it as really looking at kind of five different areas, right? We look at reporting. And tables. And for reporting and tables, we look at sort of two things. We say, what is the unused content, and what is the overlapping or potentially duplicative content, right? So if you think about the reporting for a moment, let's imagine you've got Tableau and Power BI, etc. Unused content is pretty straightforward. Simply look at usage logs, behind the scenes, and we can flag and identify, hey, here's all of the unused content in this particular project. Isn't this an example, I think, with Tableau? Not used in the last 60 days, 90 days, whatever your threshold is. You can, of course, send note, but and the process of cleaning that up, you can either clean it up automatically if something doesn't get used for a certain amount of time. It can just be cleaned up automatically by the system, or there can be more of a process where you notify the owners to say, hey, nobody's been using your content, or fewer than X number of people have been using this. Is this something that you still want to keep? And then they can go in and clean it up, so you can distribute the cleanup load. But the point is, it's not a single person doing this. It's a distributed, ongoing process for cleanup. And we provide, as part of this, that obviously you want to be able to understand, when you're cleaning something up, what is the downstream sort of lineage implication of that? Okay, that means that we no longer maybe need some tables and things of that nature, so you can facilitate all the cleanup and do everything in context, in context of knowing where the data came from to populate a particular asset, right? Then I think beyond that, and I think a lot of organizations kind of already do some version of that, but I think the things that many organizations do not do, which is critically important, is really look at overlapping or duplicative reports. And so what we do here is we look at combining, identifying report clusters. So we look at the metadata underneath the report. What are the column names in the report? What tables and columns is it using? Other metadata that's out there, tags, etc. And then we identify reports that look like there's a significant percentage overlap between them. And you say, okay, well, this is the main report. This is the one that's being used most heavily in that cluster. And then the rest are potential candidates for consolidation. And we can generate these kind of somebody as a user can come in and they can see items that can be there for consolidation. They can be distributed to them as an email so that they're aware, hey, there's a cluster we need you to look at. And then when they can click into one of these potential clusters and compare two reports and see side by side, how do these reports stack up? What are the columns that overlap between them? What is the lineage overlap between the? And then this can go into a workflow where you can then say, I want to be able to, assign this to someone for investigation, and thereby be able to, because obviously deduplication of content is not as simple as just turning stuff off. You've got to look and say, well, if these two reports, one's being used by 1,000 users, the other's used by 10, but there's 90% overlap. Well, can there be make changes to the most popular report in order to support the use case of the second report, and then we can decommission it, things of that nature. So typically you want a process for that. But the important thing here is that you need to have a mechanism by which these can be flagged. They can be routed to the right individual to do the analysis on it. And then if it is something that you do on an ongoing basis, it's like it's like cleaning your house, right? If you keep it clean, if you're continuously doing a little bit of tidying up every day, every week, then that's not a big deal. And so having a mechanism where that's continuously happening rather than trying to have people come in and dedupe everything once a year or something like that, it's much more successful, right? It's just an ongoing maintenance task that people can spend a few minutes a day or an hour or a week or something like that, and then the environment stays clean because you've got the mechanism that but you have to have the mechanism that notifies them and tells them, hey, there's something they need to clean up. So then the next, so here's an example, right? You've got the ability of taking action. So maybe I've looked at this and I'm seeing that these need to be potentially consolidated, and I'm assigning it to somebody to go take a look at, or assigning it to myself. And then this can be tracked. All the changes can be tracked until it's completely until it's resolved and deduped in the system. Or potentially, maybe you identify that yes, there's overlap here, but it doesn't make sense to combine these, and so these should remain separate. And once you flag that, then the system should never come back and tell you that this is a potential duplicate because you've already done the work to identify that no, in fact, even though they're similar, there's a very good reason why they need to stay as separate assets. Okay? And so this process, you're really cleaning up and streamlining and so forth, right? Then, the same thing essentially really applies to tables, right? If you think about the table side, you've got the ability, you want to be able to, if you've got a whole bunch of tables in your Snowflake or Databricks or GCP environment, and they're being loaded every day, and they're not really being used by any reporting actively, or maybe they're being loaded at a significant cost and they're not being utilized. Those situations, you really want to be aware of those, and so there's we provide mechanisms to do the same kind of like unused content. Same with duplicate content. If two analysts, two data pipeline engineers at different times built ETL pipelines that essentially populate tables that have a 90% overlap in the columns, and they're very large tables, well, guess what? You're spending probably double the spend on DB compute than you might otherwise if these things were consolidated together. So identifying, and based on lineage, identifying potential duplicates, routing them for investigation, and then resolving them on an ongoing basis is a key aspect of the solution that you just have to have, whether it's in a product we offer or something you build yourself. You've got to implement that in order to be able to solve for this problem of keeping the environment running optimally and not wasting a lot of resources on database spend. And then what you're seeing here is an example of recommendations that can be generated off of all this kind of analysis, right? So obviously you can have many different reports and many tables, and there may be lots of things that are potential things to look at what you really want to identify and surface out of the gate is what are the high nails, right? What are the things where if I do this, I'm going to be saving a bunch of money. So whether that's on the BI side, even the simple things is like saying, well, I've got licenses that are hardly ever used or not used at all. Maybe I can, turn those off. Maybe I've provisioned a bunch of folks as Explorer licenses in Tableau, and really I only need Viewer based on their activity over the last 6 months. So if I can just downgrade those, I'm automatically saving a bunch of money. On the table side, if I have tables that are being loaded that are not really being consumed or being consumed very infrequently, and it's very expensive to populate them, understanding that total cost of ownership for that data product for that does it relative to the usage, and then flagging scenarios where you've got high costs with low usage. That's very important, because those are opportunities to say, well, we spent a bunch of money building this and resources to do that, but in reality, it's not being used. Maybe we need to rethink of how we do it. Maybe we need to replace it with something less expensive. Maybe we just need to turn it off because it's not generating the ROI that we expect. And there's only way to do that is if you look at it end to end, right? If you look at you can't just look at reports, you've got to look at what does it cost you to populate underlying tables that then feed those reports. So having that end to end lineage, because what ties that together, right, is the ability to do that, collecting that. And as well as just misalignment sometimes in the ETL. Maybe something is, maybe you're loading every hour tables that in fact, when you look at the user consumption on the reporting side, they're consumed once a week. Well, again, you probably are paying a huge multiple of what you need to on the database loading costs for those in order to meet the business needs. So you can probably, pare that down, still delight your users, and save a whole bunch of money in the process. So coming up with actionable recommendations and then having those route to the right person for resolution, and then following that through, tracking the fact whether they resolved or not, escalating if people are not paying attention. That's the key tooling that you need in place in order to then enable your organization at scale, irrespective of how many tables you've got, how many reports you have, kind of distributing that workload in a way that's manageable and observable within the organization is sort of the key critical success factor for achieving success. Okay. So that's the optimization aspect of it. I think I'm going to probably speed this up so that we have time for everything else. So once you've done that, resource optimization, a workflow is obviously important for onboarding. So which of those reports are you going to make accessible in the portal for users? To do that, you want to have a multi-stage process. It could be, in this example, this is an example of a workflow where you can imagine on the left-hand side, all the reports that have been kind of promoted through this cleanup process are now pending review. An analyst comes in, maybe they add some metadata, maybe they bring in metadata, it maybe automatically gets synced from metadata that you might have in Calibra or Atlanta Relation or something else. Maybe somebody reviews it to see, does it look like it's consistent with all the other reporting that's out there. There can be multiple steps, like obviously for like board reporting or something like that. You might want to have many steps where the governance team and the finance team and the analysts all look at it before it goes out to the executive committee and the board. For other things, maybe just a two-step process might be sufficient. But having a workflow that's suitable for the asset and moving that workflow through so that there's a very deliberate, thoughtful process that's standardized for promoting content into a portal is very important. Right. And then once you've gone through that, now you want to obviously publish that portal to users so they can consume it. So this is the example of the Metric Insights portal. But the primary idea is all BI assets, irrespective of tools, should make their way here, assuming that they've met that key governance threshold as far as quality. You want to be able to have it organized by categories, by folders, have it be persona driven, have images there so that people can see what they're going to get into. Obviously, security layer synchronizes security with BI tools and single sign-on and all that is table stakes for this kind of solution. So all that needs to be in place. And in this example, users might coming to Metric Insights, they see all their reports, they're all available as tiles, it's all searchable. And then if they click on a tile, they can see a preview, they can see all the metadata that has been enriched that object as part of the onboarding process. So again, these things can be coming from a data cataloging tool, they can be coming just from users when they're onboarding the process, spreadsheets, whatever it is, wherever it is that you capture the metadata. But the point is it's there when it's loaded on, certification information is there, ownership information is there, so people know where to reach out about, and so forth, right? And then you should be able to then consume that content without leaving the portal, right? So everything should be iframed and consumable right there, so that, you know, without having to sign in again, it's just a seamless experience. And they don't have to care whether you're using Power BI or Tableau or Click or MicroStrategy. It should be the same experience. That's very important, because over time, especially as you introduce more and more tools, maybe you maybe introduce some AI-driven tools, the portfolio of assets changes. Having that BI portal as the single governed layer across everything that you have is incredibly important, because it creates this this consistency for user consumption, irrespective of any kind of changes that are happening below the surface. So then the final piece of the puzzle is the analytics marketplace. So we talked about kind of the portal as the consumption layer for the regular business user, and having that be a place where they come in and consume their content in a way that they know that they're looking at the certified content. They know that everything ties together. They know they can trust what they're looking at. The same idea kind of applies to the analyst, except that they're trying to build something, right? So here, certainly a solution should leverage AI, right, for intelligent search and discovery. So you can see here, like this is an example. You're saying, you know, I want to understand how. And imagine you're a hotel chain, an analyst for a large hotel chain. You want to understand how pricing levels for rooms affect your property profitability, right? You have a question you have in mind you want to solve. So the idea is you want to be able to have a solution that looks at the things that the analyst is trying to figure out, and then looks across all of the assets that are out there. Not necessarily everything published. It doesn't just have to be things in the portal. It could be things that are AI and ML assets. It could be things that are being pulled from your data catalogs. It could be things that are in your Unity catalog or in your Snowflake system or your Google data catalog. Whatever it is, right? Kind of pulls all of those assets should be in one place. From a metadata perspective, and then allow me to discover, and know that something's there. If I don't have access to it, then I should have a lock icon. So I know that something exists, with the exception of maybe a few assets that you want to treat as highly confidential. You generally want people to be aware of the things exist from an analyst perspective, so that then if they don't have access to it, they can request access. It can go through your SailPoint or ServiceNow process to be able to get them access to it. Or if it's something that they should go to a particular data catalog to look at, they can go click over there. If it's already in the portal, a report that's been published in the portal, they can consume it there, or they can go to Power BI or Tableau, etc. So a single interface that makes it really easy to discover everything that is valuable. So this is not going to be every table in your enterprise. I want to be clear, not going to be every model. It's going to be the things that the authors of that content have designated to be valuable and should be consumable, people. Because one of the problems today, if you go in a typical data catalog system, you've got hundreds or thousands of tables, and you don't know which one is actually useful and which one is not, etc. So you want to just bubble up the certified content, the good content, into a marketplace with the right metadata around it, and then that will help analysts discover the right starting point for their analysis. Oftentimes, they can save a tremendous amount of time by just reusing what's already there. Other times, they're saving time by using what's there as a building block. If they're building something new, they know with confidence that it is, in fact, something that is not already existing in the institute. They're not reinventing the wheel. So, this is an example. You can have follow-up questions, obviously. So the beauty of leveraging AI for this kind of solution is that you can, continue to clarify your questions and explore the metadata and get to a subset of things that actually reflect what you want to look at, and then delve deeper from that. So with that, I guess, Andrew, I'll send it back to you, or I guess, or maybe to David, so we can get into the next part of the program.
Yeah, absolutely. Looks like David's going to rejoin us here, and it's time for the fireside chat. So Dave, take it away.
Great. Marius, that was really great stuff. It was really good to see sort of in depth how Metric Insights works and some of the issues that you address with the products. So just thinking about the cost drivers and causes of waste, I mean, just thinking of sort of real world, what are you seeing up there? What in organizations, what's their most pressing issues that they're trying to solve right now, do you think?
So, I mean, we've seen a lot of, things that just come out. I mean, and you alluded to this, David, in your presentation, a lot of issues that arise from migration to the cloud, right? So if you think about what that entails for a moment, you kind of zoom out, you've gone from maybe an on-premise database, large-scale database you have in your environment that was very expensive, hard to maintain, et cetera, and you've gone to a cloud database. And, that's great. It means that you've got this horizontal scalability. Everything can perform much better because everything can just scale up. But that comes with a cost, and that is that there's kind of a disconnect now for a lot of the analysts that are building these solutions. It's very easy to build, right? So you're able to kind of like, create things and then not necessarily know how much, if you've done something inefficiently, right? Like let's say a classic example, right? You've got some table that has 100 million rows in it, and instead of going and writing the ETL so that you can load that incrementally each day with the new transactions, you just say, well, it's easier. I'll just load it as a whole table every time, right? And your Snowflakes or Databricks system is performing enough, it can just handle 100 million rows really quickly, no problem. You can meet your SLA for completing the loads. Well, great, but now what you don't realize is there's a charge for that. Now you're not seeing that charge; it's going to some kind of central group, but there's a charge. So that's a big area. The fact that one group doesn't necessarily know how much it costs. Or the other example is an analyst. This is a very common scenario. BI analyst will go and they'll realize a particular report is no longer being used. They'll maybe even decommission it. But in the meantime, all of the ETL that's feeding those tables in the underlying system continues to run because there's different silos in the organization. One team's doing the ETL processing, the data pipelining. Another team is doing the reporting. They don't really communicate all the time. And so, if the person on the reporting side doesn't think to go out there and take a look to see which tables could actually be decommissioned, then all those pipelines will continue running and just incurring costs that are complete waste, right? It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and I thought it was amazing. You were able to show really the usage of the reports and things like that in the tool. I mean, that's really just very interesting to look at for organizations to see which ones are useful, which ETL routines are useful, which reports are useful. And in the cloud, you're talking about, this usage-based pricing. So I guess you have the data that you could put together to see, whether it's valuable or not and how much it's costing.
That's exactly right. And that one of the problems is if you look, every system in the current BI ecosystem that you might look at has its own sort of observability, instrumentation, logging, etc. But what's missing is sort of for most consumers of BI today is the ability to tie it all together at the IT level, to be able to say, well, it's one thing. I can know which Google BigQuery queries are taking the most resource by looking at the query logs there, right? I can see that these are my most expensive queries, but I don't understand, these tables that are being populated, how are they being used downstream by which reports, and what's the consumption level of those reports? And even we've had scenarios where, I won't name the specific customer, but there was one of our customers that all of a sudden 1 month their Google pricing, how much they were being charged, spiked by an insane amount, 30%, right, month over month. Wow. And they just there's so many queries that were running there, right, that it was very difficult for them to understand, well, is that some kind of a legitimate spike? Probably not. Where is it coming from, right? So comparing usage patterns from this month to that month, and then understanding, is it consumption from the reporting layer that's causing that? Is it that something changed in the ETL processing? Is it some new use case that was added? It takes so long to do that analysis. It has to be done manually. And so what you need to run an optimized environment, right? It's almost like having a car where you don't have a oil gauge and speedometer. You got to go under the hood, pop it open, and prod in there. No one would ever accept a car like that, but yet we accept BI solutions that have that sort of. You need an end-to-end. You need that instrumentation panel where you understand the overall impact and where do you want to focus to keep things moving well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we've talked about AI coming into the BI environment, but even just data science itself, I could imagine a lot of what you're talking about would be applicable there, because that's an issue with AI models and deploying the models. Is suddenly you've got this really hot spot in database usage, but not being able to see why, what's causing this. And so I imagine a lot of the things that you're talking about with BI could be applied to data science and AI teams as well.
Yeah. For sure, and I think oftentimes, if you, I mean, I guess it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this as well. Like, what do you see? We find a lot of organizations, those data science teams and the BI teams are kind of in silos to some extent.
Mhm.
So there's really not enough kind of value. A lot of times, data science teams generate lots of great predictive models and other things, and they're not necessarily fully leveraged by the AI team just because there's not as much awareness of what's there and how to best utilize it. So getting that cross, that ability to see transparently across the side, both from a consumption perspective, but also even just from a what's there and what's useful and what should you be, what tooling do you have to actually solve a problem is, I think, important.
Yeah, we definitely see that, and I think that the marketplace idea is interesting too. So that, I guess, a marketplace could lend itself to solving some of that, just helping people work together, see what's available, and things like that. So I thought that was really interesting, the marketplace approach you described.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that if you look at many organizations, I bet if most of the folks listening on this have either there's been some attempt to do that in their organization, or at least there's been discussion of doing something. And it's just the challenge of it is to do it effectively. You've got to have connectors to the metadata of all of the different tools that you're using and bring that information in. So, that's because you need, in order for a marketplace to be useful, just like for a portal to be useful to your regular users, all of their reporting should be there. All the relevant reporting should be there. For a marketplace to be useful to your analysts, all of the relevant assets, that high quality assets, should be registered in there. So you got to make sure that you're pulling it from every place, and you've got to have a strategy where you do that. And obviously, you want to leverage. I think that's a place where you do want to leverage some technology, because you don't want to have to build those connectors to bring all the metadata from Power BI and from Tableau and from now a lot of the catalogs, like a Unity catalog and Snowflake catalog, have the ability, ML Flow, right? There's all these places where these ML models are registered. And so you want to bring them in together and kind of consume them together, bring that metadata in from there for those things that are flagged correctly. So the two parts of it is you need the connectors, and then you need to have a process by which you separate the wheat from the chaff from a quality perspective, right? So that you don't bring in some half-hearted attempt that somebody started for an ML model that doesn't actually work. No, you want to bring the things that have been taken all the way through to completion, that have been validated, that somebody is certified. You want to be able to know who the owner is of that, so that you can go reach out to them. So it's that idea of like bringing in the content that's actually good, and then if you do that and you surf, then I think it becomes an incredibly useful asset as a discovery tool. That like you said, David, it saves both the AI and the BI side tremendous amount of time, because they can kind of cross-pollinate across the resources that are created, and as well as data pipelining engineers and et cetera, right?
Yeah, and to make sure that it's the good stuff that's in the marketplace, not the, it's like when you go to the market, you don't want to see all the bruised fruit and
that's a great
packages
analogy.
that are, yeah, right. So well, maybe we talk, I know we want to get to audience questions about resource management practices. I mean, what are the flaws you see in organizations that they're currently doing it, and then how can they kind of take steps to improve it?
Yeah, so I think there's I mean, the first part is recognizing that this is an area to focus on, right? So really, what I see more, unfortunately, there's sort of misconception. Sometimes people think, okay, well, if I have a data catalog where I capture all my PII data and I put security in place on my BI assets, right? And my AI team has some kind of place where they can, do their thing, then I have governance in place. Right, and that couldn't be further from the truth, right? I think that governance is not just security plus flagging creating glossary terms and flagging data classification and sensitivity in a catalog. It's so much more than that. Sure, those are of course table stakes. You've got to have good security, and you've got to have good data management and good data practices. But you really need to think of that as the start and not the end of governance. So that's, conceptually, and getting the organization from a practice to think about that, and thinking of governance holistically, right? So instead of saying, well, okay, everyone govern your particular areas of the stack, right? And go figure out what tools you need. The number one thing that I think sort of is important for organizations is to think about, no, we need to look at that BI AI ecosystem as a single ecosystem, including the data, the transformation of that data, the consumption of that data, irrespective of tools. And we need to think of a way to govern that for both effective consumption and for costs holistically. Right. And if that's how you're approaching it, then, you know, you'll be asking the right set of questions, and which will naturally come up with the right solutions for you to implement. But that's really, I think, the crux of what has to happen in order to you know, move the needle on these kinds of efforts.
And organizations are trying to find the right balance between the centralized governance and then sort of domain control, like the data mesh kind of idea, which is critical, but you don't want to have gaps. And then, you know, the redundancies and just sort of mistakes that are out there. Yeah.
That's a great point. And I think that's like, we should kind of double click on that for a moment. Governance does not mean that you have one person governing or one team that's governing. Not at all, right? That yes, you want to have some group or set of individuals that set the guardrails, that set the rules of the road, right? That say, okay, here's just a strategy, here's how we're going to put together. That could be the governance team, it could be the BI team, it could be leadership, it could be a combination of folks from the BI AI group, however you want to do that. But ultimately, for any governance solution to work at scale in a large enterprise, it has to be federated and distributed, right? Because the people, I mean, David, you alluded to this, the people that know which content should, after these two reports, which one should I keep, which one should I deprecate, how do I combine them? Well, that's the subject matter expert in that area. The person that knows which AI tools should be made available and promoted, and which should not. That's a data scientist that's working on that domain. So that has to be distributed, and you have to have a tooling in place, right? Such that once you've got the process in place, that tooling enables that distributed governance, so that you're not so that it's happening kind of in a way that's light touch, so people will actually do it. Right? If it's easy to clean everything up as you're going, then people will do it. If it's this huge lift that I've got to do once a year, where I need to spend a week trying to clean up, I might not do it at all, right? Or because I'm going to be too busy. So having that mechanism, and then having some high-level compliance measurement to know, okay, this is happening in this team, this is not. So you can go to people and say, nudge them and say, well, look, everyone else in the organization is doing their part, but we know you're not really attending to your stuff. Can you step it up and do it? So all of those pieces have to be in place, but it has to be a distributed solution with some governance overlays on top of that.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, Andrew, I should hand it back to you so we get some audience questions in before it gets too late here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that great discussion. And Marius, this question's regarding roles, and I know you just touched on some of those roles, so I'll just ask this directly to you. And Dave, if you have any thoughts, please jump in. But Marius, this person asks, who do you think is best positioned in an organization to govern the BI environment? Is it the data governance people, data engineers, a lead central BI group? Your thoughts, please.
So my thoughts is that governance has to be a priority that's established by the CIO or the CDAO, somebody kind of who is in charge of really all of these teams, where underneath them they've got because ultimately for the reasons I described earlier, it has to be an effort that the effective governance requires participation from the BI team and the analysts, from the data science team, from the data teams that do pipelining and data engineers, et cetera, right? So you have to sell this the idea that hey, there can be a lot of efficiency had to the CIO. And I don't think it's a hard sell, because generally effective governance is going to translate directly to cost savings, right? You're going to be able to do more with less or more with the same, right? Depending upon how you want to do it, from the perspective of you're going to be much more effectively spending your dollars for database consumption, for BI tool licensing. Analysts are going to be much more efficient because they're not duplicating effort. So it's not a hard sell, but you need to do that. And then you ideally what you want to do is then you want to look for the leads in each of these organizations working together with a data governance team to put together the framework that we just described about, how is this governance going to take place? And then execution is then distributed within the teams, right? But then in doing it, you're taking that sort of top-down approach to ownership. You've got buy-in from the CIO, you've got the leads for each of these functional areas participating, and therefore they have buy-in, which then makes it much easier for everyone underneath them, as well as analysts in the business and other things to participate, because it's an industry, it's an overall mandate. And then you want to implement this in such a way where kind of the types of things I was showing you, you're measuring results, right? Because there's nothing more powerful than being able to say, hey, you know what, we deprecated these tables and now we're saving X dollars a month or X dollars a year because of these actions. That's very motivating to people in the organization. They feel like their actions are actually working. It makes them look good. It makes the management feel good because they're saving on resources. So having that measurement instrumentation around the whole effort as well is important, so that you can get the flywheel going where it's self-reinforcing.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Marius just said. And I think just visibility is so critical. I mean, to be able to actually see, the usage, what reports people are using or what dashboards or whatever, is just so critical for all the team members on the committee that are trying to govern. So that's great.
All right. Well, that unfortunately leaves us with no time remaining today. I know we only got to one question there. We'll send the rest of the questions out to Marius. Maybe he can get back to those folks offline here. But do want to thank our speakers that we did hear from today, Dave Stodder with TDWI, Marius Moscovici with Metric Insights. And also thank you again to Metric Insights for sponsoring today's webinar. Please remember we did record today's webinar. We'll be emailing you a link to an archived version of the presentation. And if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, you can locate the resource window to download the PDF. And finally, for those unfamiliar, TDWI hosts in-person educational events. Our next one is TDWI Transform West in Las Vegas on February 23rd through the 28th. As a valued webinar attendee, we're offering each and every one of you $100 off any event package. Please check your post-webinar communications for a unique discount code and a link to further details. And from all of us here, let me say thank you so much for attending. This does conclude today's event.
Thank you, everyone.